Well, hi everyone. Thanks you guys for inviting me. It's neat to come and talk about my research in a very different setting. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I teach in the Department of Anthropology here at Ohio State. And I've been working in southern Mexico a lot of years. 4 years, and I won't remember at this point. And the folks that I work with, they consume grasshoppers. That's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. My own research really, this is a very small piece of what I do. I tend to look at migration from Mexico to the United States and in global patterns of movement as well. So you'll see that my expertise is very different than everyone else's, and I probably bring kind of a different piece to the discussion. So if you have questions, please just feel free to interrupt and ask. I have no problem with that, and I'll try my best to answer them. I'm really not an ecologist or an entomologist, so yeah.
Jeff, I'm going to have to ask you.
Do you need that? I'm sorry. Okay. Man, that would have been good. I probably would have tripped on it.
Yeah.
So actually, and I will just show you guys in that the FAO report. This is these are the folks. This is what I'm talking about right here. It's on. It doesn't have a page, but anyway, this is a chapulín vendor in Oaxaca. So that's what I'll be talking about. So I'm going to talk about chapulines. Chapulines are just the term that local folks use for grasshoppers that they toast. In Spanish, they're saltamontes, but locally they're called chapulín. It's actually a Nahuatl term. It's used for lots of different things. Some of you may be a little bit old enough to remember Chapulín Colorado, who is a cartoon character in Mexico. He just died last year, but he was one of the things that I used to enjoy watching. Anyway, we'll talk about that. And again, I want to thank everybody for inviting me here. And I also want to acknowledge that in Oaxaca, in Mexico, where I do this research, one of my colleagues, Nydia Sanchez, is a person who helps me a lot with this work, and she'll come up here. And one of the things I want to share as we begin talking about chapulín is just how unique this is, the consumption of the insects are. We know that more than 70 different kinds of insects are consumed throughout Mexico, and then it gets even bigger when we add insect byproducts. And I'm going to talk about, again, chapulín, which are grasshoppers, and I'm talking about this area here in southern Mexico, but it's very specifically in a region of of Oaxaca, in the state of Oaxaca, called the Central Valleys, and it's eaten by really a very specific population. It's an indigenous group called the Zapotec, and Nydia, the person who I mentioned, who I do some of this research with, she is, in fact, a Zapotec. She's a member of this indigenous minority group. She comes from a very different region, and when we started this project, she thought it was, and we started a project really looking at consumption and production of these grasshoppers. She thought it was the most disgusting thing in the world. And she's from this population that we know is eating these things. By the end of our project, we were both just munching away because they are very, very tasty. But I want to start with this just as a kind of a setup. We know that there's about at least 70 insects that are consumed, and the byproducts of insects actually increases that number when we think about things like honey and so on and so forth that's also consumed. But what this shows us is, if we look at here in this chart, poverty rates, and you'll see this. So this is where we're working. It's very indigenous. The other very indigenous parts of Mexico this is Chiapas, where the Zapatista uprising has founded. This is around in Mérida and the Yucatan. These are very indigenous parts of Mexico. They're they're places where you see lots of the population below the poverty line, and it's not surprising that we see the consumption of insects very high in these places as well. They kind of go together. Okay, And it's not a surprise when I'll share with you just the costs involved here, because in fact, for producers, these are free. You can make them and eat them. You can also make a lot of money, but you don't need to necessarily do that. Okay, so one of the things that helps us as we think about eating these grasshoppers is really how we come at them. Okay, they're very popular right now, but these are traditions that are rooted in the past. The popularity today is, and I'll get to this as we get towards the end of my presentation, the popularity today is odd, to say the least. It's very much based around doing something different. And in fact, probably all of you know Andrew Zimmer, who's on that weird food show. Okay. In writing about this stuff, one of the things that he notes is that there's not so much weird foods as foods that just don't fit. And chapulín or saltamontes or grasshoppers are one of those foods. And so we have to kind of, in a sense, look towards the past to figure out where these critters fit into the diet, because now they're in a kind of odd category. So in the past, we know that they were very, very valuable and very prevalent. This is, in fact, it's not a really great thing, but this is from a codex, a Nahuatl codex, and it's showing some agricultural production. One of the things we know, they're messing around with corn, maize, and snakes, but there is this little, see, I don't know, you can't see it very well, but there's a little grasshopper head, so that's why we have it. Anyway, we know that in the pre-Columbian period, people were eating a lot of bugs, and some research that was done discovered that there's a food source. It's called, very often referred to as Mexican caviar. It's also called escamol. It's like an ant roe. It's like ant eggs. That in the aquatic areas of central Mexico, and where Mexico City is today, if we go back, centuries, it was a huge lake, a huge inland, very shallow lake. That there's an estimate that yearly populations were pulling, this just blew me away, almost 4,000 tons of edible insect, and insect-related materials out of these lakes for consumption. And that's just an amazing, these were big populations. These were populations in the hundreds of thousands, but that's a lot of insects. And mostly what it is was this Mexican caviar, this roe. It was the eggs of different kinds of aquatic insects. And I think that part of what's important here is the role that not just insects can play, but insects and the byproducts, the eggs, the honeys, and so on and so forth. So in Mexico, we find that this dates back a long time, but you can even see the disgust in the way that this is reported, because early records, and we have records that date back to right as the conquest of Mexico is taking off, those records tend to note that this was just disgusting. These are people, it's kind of to make these people seem very, very much like animals. They're eating bugs rather than eating, real things, okay? So we know that, by the 15th century, when records start showing up that we use in historical kind of data, that the chapulín is there, that other insects are there. They grow in popularity, and they've really exploded in popularity recently. So that today, you can find them everywhere. You can find them in lots of restaurants in Mexico City. You can find them all over southern Mexico on menus. You can find them in California. You can find them on the west side of Columbus, because there's a small little bakery called Panaderia Oaxaqueño, where occasionally they'll have chapulín. They're not in season yet, so they won't be there. They won't come into season probably till maybe the end of this month. But they're showing up everywhere, and they're showing up as a snack. They're showing up as a main dish, and really it's because they're a very easily digested, low-calorie food source that's very high in proteins and very high in amino acids, as we've heard. In fact, the chapulín, the grasshoppers, this is one of the ways they're served. This is a taquito. This is just corn tortilla with some guacamole, and you can't tell it very well, but these are little baby chapulín. These are the little babies. And some queso fresca on the top. That's fresh Oaxacan cheese. And they're very nutritious. They contain between 293 and 762 kilocalories, 35 to 48 grams of protein per 100 grams of dry matter. So they're good for your diet. They're very digestible. They can be dangerous. I'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the funniest phone calls I've ever gotten as an anthropologist was somebody who called me and said, I'm really into dieting and losing weight, and I'm always looking for new diets. If I go on a chapulín diet, will this work? And of course, I had to say, I'm not a medical doctor. I can't tell you. All I can tell you is that they taste good. And in fact, you do have to be careful because they can be dangerously contaminated with lead. So you can't just grab them and eat them by the handful. I'll talk a little bit about what that means. Okay. So this is, here we go. Okay. This is, just to give you a little bit a sense of what we're talking about here. These are two, this is chapulín on alfalfa. And this is chapulín on maíz, on corn. And this is where everybody gets their chapulín now. They used to be caught in the wild. They're actually described now as semi-domesticated because people pull them off of what are called milpa. And this is where there's been a shift from the 1960s to the present, going towards monocropping in rural parts of southern Mexico. And that's really conducive to raising grasshoppers. And so the most important crops that we see people growing locally are alfalfa and maíz, and that's where you get your crickets or your grasshoppers. I'm sorry. And what's really fun here, and I don't know if this sounds just completely bizarre. These are really sweet, and these are really bitter. And it's because of the crops that they're eating. The alfalfa is a sweeter kind of thing to eat, I guess. I don't really, again, I'm not an agriculturalist. These are the things. They're also much younger when they're coming out of the alfalfa rather than the maíz. This is the cycle. They don't follow a regular growth cycle. They don't go through a metamorphosis. They just molt and get bigger. So it's called a partial metamorphosis, I guess. Again, I'm not an entomologist, so I don't really get all of these things. But most of what people are going to eat are the adults. You don't eat chapulín eggs. The nymphs, these are the most delicious. And when you see them, they're actually they're more expensive. And the really cool thing is it looks like beef jerky. Like shredded beef jerky or something, or sometimes they get referred to as bacon bits, because if somebody had put them on something when they're little, you would not know that you were even eating them. They just taste like that. So. Mm-hmm.
Since they're so popular, is that actually keeping the farmers using pesticides?
So that's a really interesting issue, which is the pesticides. In some places, people have stopped using pesticides. In a lot of places, and it's one of the reasons why I think these things are so popular, people have not been using pesticides because they tend to be very poor. They can't afford the costs of the addition of pesticides. And so that's been very conducive to the growth of these critters. And in a couple of states where they've actually moved away from say growing corn or growing crops of alfalfa, they're actually moving towards just cropping these things. They're growing them on their gardens. And in a really nasty kind of situation, they're actually gassing the fields to kill the grasshoppers, collect them, and sell them. And they're not necessarily safe to eat. So, and there's a lot of things going on. Part of the challenge here, too, and I don't know if we'll talk about it later, but grasshoppers and other insects are managed by the the Department of Agriculture in Mexico, or its equivalent in Mexico, the Secretary of Agriculture. Food falls under a completely different program, so they don't talk to each other. These are described as pests that need to be controlled rather than a food source, and it leads to a lot of challenges. So. The harvest occurs again for these critters from I should say early summer through autumn, not late summer, early summer through autumn, and it starts actually with these nymphs. The nymphs emerge May as the rains begin to come back. This is a region that's in the tropics, and the rains are very regularly predictable around in May. Tapering off in the middle of the summer, and then returning in the early fall. The nymphs will start to show up, and that's when you start to collect them, and and you collect them largely on alfalfa fields. As they molt and grow into the adult phase, they tend to move actually to maize fields and capture shifts to the cornfields. And one of the ecologists that I've worked with at the Instituto Tecnológico de Oaxaca, he describes this whole process as becoming one of semi-domestication, where they're actually being largely managed. And if you look at the kinds of the gardens and the fields where they're coming from, they're very much they're very much managed fields. They're not wild. And this is one of the questions that we have. We're going back to hopefully start doing some more research on this next fall. One of the challenges here is this shift in how they're being captured. In the wild, they're actually food for lots of other critters. In the fields, they're protected because there's just not a lot of pests. So one of the questions that we have is, how has production really changed? We don't know a whole lot about this. Here's just a little bit to show you how these things are managed, caught, and organized. This is out getting chapulín. So I have to tell you, this I found this photo online. These are staged, and I did this myself. I was going to put my own picture in here, but I like to put other people up. Anyway, this is in the wild. When I did this, it was so funny. Nobody catches chapulín in the light of the day. It's too hot. They're too jumpy. They disappear. You don't go in the wild. I went and I said to one of the families I was working with, I said I wanted to come in and catch some chapulín and just document this. And they said, when? And I said, how about I'll come tomorrow? And they said, what time? And I said, I don't know, when should I come? They said, can you come at 4 a.m.? And I said, no, I can't come at 4 a.m. I'm not getting up that early. They said, why don't you want to come at 4 a.m.? I said, well, I also want to take pictures, so I need some light. And they said, but you don't catch them when it's light out. You have to catch them in the morning before the sun rises, so it's cool and they're not moving around a whole lot. Okay? And so I finally convinced one subject I was working with to do this with me. I said, okay, we're just going to pretend for the morning. And the whole thing, it was like a couple of hours, laughing hysterically about the big gringo out with this bag, chasing grasshoppers, not able to catch hardly anything. It's typically something that's done by women, and we refer to them as chapulineras. These are women that manage chapulín, and their children. And several of the women that we work with actually said, it's the greatest thing because it keeps my kids busy in the morning and I don't have to worry about them. I'll just send them out with the bags and I can cook them breakfast or I can get them ready for school or something. So you catch them in the morning following the rains. You never catch them after the sun is really up because they get too warmed up and they jump around too much. They are grasshoppers. Once they're caught, they're sorted. They're usually kept in boxes, sorted, allowed to kind of calm down, clean themselves out. One of the things that everybody talks about is the fact that if you've got a chapulinera, a real Oaxacan woman who's doing this with her family, they're going to be so much better because they're going to be clean. And if you go to some terrible producer, like mass producer from a place like Puebla, you're going to be eating chapulín poop, because they're not going to let their chapulín clean themselves out. So once you get them, once they're caught, they're cooked on, this is called a comal. It's just a big clay cooking surface. You boil, what you do is you take the chapulín in a little net, you boil it so that they die, they turn bright red. Then you throw them on your comal and you toast them up. You put a little bit of lemon juice on top of them to give them a little flavor. You use this thing called sal de gusano, which is another byproduct of or insect-related food. It's actually made from, if you've ever, you see a bottle of tequila with the worm on the bottom, those worms are from those are gusanos. Those are little caterpillars that are associated with the tequila. They're ground up with some salt and a little bit of sugar. It's a smell, and when I go places, if I have that smell hits me, and it's like, man, you're right back in Oaxaca. It's the smell of Oaxaca. If you've had like tequila, it's that, and you sprinkle that on top. Quite delicious. This is what you get. These are different women selling chapulín. So she's an ambulante. She's just walking around in the market selling. She's packaged. This is sal de gusano. This is the salt. I love this stuff. I actually have it in my house. I brought it. I bring it back for friends, and they just think it's the most disgusting thing because it smells. You put a little bit of it out, and it smells like you're an alcoholic. So. She's a producer and seller, so she's got her chapulín, lots of different kinds. In this picture, you can't quite see it here, but she also has the worms, the cooked worms, that not ground but ready for purchase. And this is another ambulante. And this is what's really interesting, is that there's so many different ways to produce and sell your chapulín. Donahi Martinez, who was one of the people that I worked with, a really wonderful restaurant owner, she described them as a natural gift because you don't have to spend any money on these and you can make a lot of money selling them. And I'll show you a picture of what she's able to do with them in just a minute. But for the women that are making these things, they are not just supplementing their household budgets, they're oftentimes doubling and tripling household incomes through the sale of this stuff. These things are, it sounds probably insane, but a little handful of this is so expensive. They sell for about 100 pesos a kilo, which is the equivalent of about $10 a pound, which is far more expensive than beef or chicken. But they're very, very tasty. You don't have to sell a lot. What's amazing is, go into these women, if you say, well, I'll give you, a handful, and you want to buy like a kilo, and she says 100 pesos, and you say, I'll give you 80. She'll say, come back tomorrow. Okay? Very different than the typical kind of situation where people are going to bargain with you. Okay? So all these, they're really making a great deal of money. And as I say here, 20 pesos for a handful, about 100 pesos for a kilo. It's an amazing amount of money. You don't have to sell a lot. In fact, this guy was the only man who was selling chapulín that we met, earning so much money from this. And you can see this is called a mountain of grasshoppers, right? And there's nothing underneath there. That's just, it's like about, it's about 50 kilos. It's amazing how much. Anyway, this guy, he had been an airplane mechanic. And he said to me, and we did an interview with him, and he said to me, it was so annoying to be a mechanic. I had to be there on time. They picked on me always. If I made a mistake, I'd be so worried, because I could crash a plane. Really? He says, it's great. He sent 3 kids to college selling this. Okay? So, and he had a puesto just to sell his grasshoppers. Here's another. Now, she was actually just employed to sell, but you can see these montons, and every one of these is a different kind of chapulín, different sorts of production. Not really a different flavor, okay, but a different size, and from a different area. And they actually taste different. The little ones, again, are much sweeter, the big and much more expensive. Bigger adults are a little more bitter. This is Nydia, who is doing the research with me, so you get to see her. And these are, how you're just filling garbage bags full of them. It's just unbelievable. And selling them. And so in the market, this is one woman who also had a little puesto in the market to sell hers. And she had been there for, I think when we talked to her, and this was already about 10 years ago, she'd been there already like 35 years selling grasshoppers. So, it was pretty incredible. Now, what's interesting is she has a constant kind of flow of customers that include locals, that people eat this stuff as snack foods. It includes restaurant owners. They're selling this stuff at very high prices to consumers, and lots of tourists. You will see, and she's in one of the markets that actually has a line of tourists going through it typically in any given day. One of the things that you'll see are the gringos lining up to show that they can eat an insect, right? And buying a bag and taking it home and probably throwing it away later. But what's really interesting is to see how the market is changing. And the high-end and export markets are really changing. We're finding chapulín on menus. We're finding new ways of processing. This was a small company in the city, in Oaxaca City, started by two kids that had graduated from the ITO, the Instituto Tecnológico de Oaxaca. They were freeze-drying, packaging, and shipping off chapulín. I will tell you, these were disgusting. They tasted like, I don't know, like metal. I mean, they just weren't very good. And I think it's in part because really fresh chapulín are delicious. Freeze-dried chapulín are just sort of, So the bitterness really comes out. Really great question. A very short shelf life. In fact, I was blown away how quickly they rotted. So these are, people have these bags, 50 kilos of grasshoppers, and you know that they have a shelf life of really a week at the most. So they're selling them pretty quickly because they know what they're bringing. And we met one woman who was selling. She was one of these people who was coming from outside of Oaxaca, and she was actually in Puebla, and her husband had decided to just give up on corn, and they were just raising chapulín. And these were one of the families that were gassing the fields to kill everything. She came into the market with over 400 kilos of chapulín to sell, and she was going to sell it all. It was unbelievable. But I've had these. I brought them up. It's one of the funniest things to try to go through customs with. If you go up to customs and you have this really stinky bag of chapulín, and they're like, "What?" And you tell them what you're bringing in. The guys at immigration really have a hard time. You say, "It's a bag of grasshoppers." They're like, "What?" He said, "It's a bag of grasshoppers." And it's cooked. Yeah, okay, so it's okay to bring it in. And you just know that in the back of their minds, the question is there cocaine at the bottom of this? Or something? I don't know. Because it smells so strong. I'm sure it protects it. Anyway, and you can find them all over the U.S. So this is, again, it's not quite bright in here, but this is Donna He, who is helping us out in a lot of our research. And she's actually, these are like little botanas, little appetizer plates. And we just eat the grasshoppers off of them, and we're drinking shots of tequila, or mezcal in Oaxaca, and eating our grasshoppers. But I also wanted to show you, this is crema de chapulín. This was made, it was kind of a really lovely sauce on a chuleta, on the pork chop. And it's grasshoppers and some spices, garlic, with a kind of cream cheesy base. And it was really good over this. We also made, this is chapulín salsa, where we just added them as an addition to the salsa, and then they were actually sprinkled on everything else. And so that was a big meal that we had. And the funny thing was, this was cooked for us cooked for me by a very wealthy family, because they knew what we were doing, and they invited me and my team over for dinner, and they said, "We want you to know that we're not peasants, that people know how to eat these things, and they don't just eat them rolled up in a taco or something." So that was that. Okay. So Somehow these got out of order on me. So that gives you a sense of the chapulín in Oaxaca. And again, that's part of what I've been working on just for years. And it's really a wonderful project looking at how these things are consumed and understanding how important they are. I said that they can be dangerous. One of the challenges in Oaxaca is that there's a kind of pottery that is very much associated with the state. It's called Oaxacan greenware. That pottery has a green glaze on it that's about 80% lead, and they don't fire it at a rate that's hot enough to set the lead so that it's safe. And so the lead will leach out. And in chapulín, what we've done is we've actually done some testing of raw, that is unprepared, prepared, and then chapulín specifically coming out of green pots. And what we've discovered is that they go from basically no lead in the natural caught, like the raw chapulín, toasted chapulín, very small, insignificant, not amounts that anybody needs to worry about, to the critters coming out of the green pottery with lead contamination rates that are 400 times permissible rates. So it's really, this is why when someone calls me and says, can I eat these for a diet, I don't say yes or no. I just say you really need to talk to a doctor, because I don't know where the chapulín are coming from. And, it does make it very dangerous. But this isn't just for grasshoppers. This is for all foods in Oaxaca that have any kind of acid that's going to pull the lead out of those pots. So it's a real problem. There's a couple of anthropologists, public health folks that are trying to deal with this, that we've done some work together. It's really frustrating, but it is part of the scene and something that needs to be known, that we need to do more work on. But let's move from Oaxaca to the globe. And in Mexico we see 70 different kinds of insects that are consumed, but it's actually nothing special, right? Because in fact what we know is that about 80% of the world's population is eating insects intentionally. Over 3,000 different ethnic groups in 130 different countries. And then, of course, as we learned, we're all eating bugs anyway. I won't tell you stories about that. I could just, you don't want to get a food issues just because you have an anthropologist talking to you. But everybody is eating bugs. And, of course, around the world, people are eating them. And one of the things that's really neat, it's so nice that you guys have this for everyone. I really encourage you to take a look at the report. I've always just I have a downloaded copy on my computer. It's so nice to have it like this. Yeah. But they do a great job. The FAO does a great job talking about different groups and why it's important, and that it's really not weird. For us, it's really, really weird, and I'll get to that in just as I end. But everybody's eating, and we need to get past our disgust in this. We need to get past our sense of horror that we're eating a pest and eating a bug. And honestly, things like having insects controlled by agricultural programs rather than food programs, it creates a framework that doesn't support moving these things. Because on the one hand, you have people calling them a pest that needs to be controlled. On the other hand, you have people saying, well, this is a great food source. It's almost as if you need a special kind of thing there in the middle. So I just wanted to share with you some of the different places where we find this stuff. And again, you can find a lot of this in the FAO report. But here's from Thailand, and here's, I just went to the web to get a lot of this stuff. I sell about 10 different insects. They like to eat these silkworms. Tourists like grasshoppers. It's funny, what people like and don't like. And, everybody likes everything. But here's how they're prepared. And really, I think part of the challenge here is if you walked up and you really don't think about what you're looking at, it just tastes good. But when you have a picture and it's kind of highlighting the fact that this is a bug, it makes it much harder to kind of to consume it. Think about the difference of, do you eat the macaroni and cheese, and do you know that it's got so many parts of an insect in it? If you think about the disgust factor, you're probably not going to eat it. So here's in the night market in Donghuman in Beijing, and different kinds of bugs. I love this one, just saying parasites, right? This is like this is marketing 101, right? Don't give the consumer the information they don't need or don't want or something. It becomes very, very hard. The menu, it's just wonderful. And again, at some level, you have to just look at them and think food, not insect, and then it makes it a little bit easier to consume. Okay. Here's this is from Ghana in West Africa, and this is some work that's going on by I think it is in fact the FAO and the UN. Working to improve the diets locally and making an argument that weevil larvae can be a really important part of the local diet. Thinking that it's got 96% of your iron, for example, compared with only 21% coming from meat. Okay? And again, this is more than likely free. One of the terrible things people say about Oaxacans, the folks that make the chapulineras, is they joke about these. People from outside the state joke about them, and they say, well, if you can't afford pesticide, just hire some Oaxacans. They'll eat their way through your field and clean it right up, right? It's really insulting. It's a really insulting thing to say. But it also highlights that, this is management, and this is something that people can do that really does fit into the cultural system. It doesn't have to be a problem. And here, we can create breeding facilities. And I think this is stuff that Kevin will probably be talking about. We can produce this stuff, and it's very low impact, which is also important. It fits right in there. Okay. Here's another. I put this photo in very specifically because I think this captures largely the challenge before us, is that we see the consumption of insects, regardless of where it is, regardless of who's doing it, whether it's in Thailand or Mexico or Ghana, Australia, China. We see it as primitive. And we take a picture like this and we slap it on the internet and we say, we all ought to be eating bugs. It's like what the cave people did. This kid is not a cave person. He's now a 21st century person. He's smart enough to know that this is something delicious to eat, a witchetty grub. I don't know if you guys have heard about these. I remember talking to somebody who had no idea it was a bug. They just thought it was food. Okay? And that's where we're at, And that's actually quite an amazing thing if you think about it. It's quite different than, say, someone saying, these are pests. He's smart enough to know what to eat. And he's smart enough to know that there's a resource. In fact, there's a site where somebody talks about how they got caught in part of Australia, cut off from the outside world, so to speak, and they turned to eating these things and discovered that they were able to survive. Okay. So that's really important. Then there's also, I mentioned when I started, the byproducts. And, this is one you can't forget, which is honey, and which is very often joked about as bee poop or bee barf, And it's neither, of course. It's honey, but it is produced by insects. It's produced by bees, and we don't have any problem eating it. Right? We don't think about it as an insect or as a product of an insect, but there it is, and it's something important, I think, for us to think about. So here's where I think at some level we are, and one of the reasons why events like this are so important, because we've got to get past the sense of disgust. The other thing I learned just yesterday in doing some work with a student of mine is there's a whole region of food that are called dare foods, and I had never really thought of this. We have to get past disgust, and we have to get past the dare. And I would argue that the kinds of, Andrew Zimmer and his ability to seemingly eat the most disgusting things on the planet, but never let you forget how disgusting they really are. We have to get past this sort of stuff. Because until we can look at that and say, boy, that looks good, and not, oh my God, right? We're gonna have a challenge, and the challenge, and this is in part where the anthropology fits in this work, is to talk about how these are cultural categories. Food is not just nutrition, and it's one of the things that's so important about, say, programs like this, the stuff that the Food Innovation Center does on the OSU campus. These are programs where we're looking not just to try to enhance, health, enhance people's abilities to make better choices, enhance nutrition, but do it in a way that's culturally viable, okay? Because, I can eat a bug. I could probably get almost anybody to eat a bug. Kids, they love it, right? You give them a piece of chocolate with a mealyworm on it, and they're just like, oh, I ate a bug. But that's not going to change it. That's not going to change the way that we eat. And so it's getting beyond this sense of disgust and the dare kind of quality here. And I actually think that a lot of the high-end selling of chapulín in Oaxaca, you can get this stuff in LA, as I said, you can get it on the west side here. It's kind of managed through this idea of disgust, through this idea of we dare you to eat a bug, right? And you see the pictures online of everybody, eating I have one, with my chapulín in my hand and a big smile on my face, right? I'm happy to eat them. I think they're delicious. I've learned to love them. I've also learned, so I leave you with this one little fact. Don't eat the legs, okay? The grasshoppers are great. The legs are really awful. They scratch all the way down. Yeah, so that's what's important. See, that's how you eat it's not that it's gross. It's that you just got to know how to eat it right. Okay. So that's what I have to say. Here's just some of the folks that I've worked with. This is Nydia, who's helped me a lot. This is a guy, Salvador Lopez. He's an anthropologist in Oaxaca as well. There's the chapulín, the original. The work that I've done has been supported by the National Science Foundation, the National Geographic, the OSU Institute for Population Research. Everybody loves to talk about bugs, so people love to give you a little bit of money to do this. And of course, my home department, the Department of Anthropology. And I thank you all for your attention today. And if there are any other questions, please do let me know. Yeah. In the photo where the guy is selling those big montons of chapulín, how is he getting them? So he's called an acaparador. He's buying it up. He's actually not producing at all. He's got women, chapulineras, that he's working with, and they deliver to him. So he pays them, and then he puts them out. So, yeah. Typical, right? The guy is doing all, getting the money, and the women are doing all the work. So, yeah. Other questions? Yeah. No, I think that this is really important, and this idea of debugifying, and how do we do this, or what role does it play? It's really important, because I think that's one of those places where we move beyond the disgust factor, right?
Not doing the industry any favors.
Yeah, no, he's not. He's you're not going to make an industry by having people once in their life eat a bug, right? Yeah.
So you can put
Yeah.
stuff in, I think you had Kevin's here. Yeah, but
Yeah, he's back there.
we can put this stuff into an energy bar, put an animal feed.
Absolutely.
People are going to go,
Yeah.
damn.
Well, they won't even know. That's the thing. It's kind of like they'll know, but it's the sense of the flour that you have in your shelf has got bugs in it. People just don't really think about it. Gives it that crunch quality. But as I said, the very small, the babies, and everybody just calls it, it's so funny. They don't call them nymphs, they call them babies, which is really just sort of weird. Like, I'm eating baby grasshoppers. Anyway, the babies, so what happens when you toast them is on the small ones, the legs actually cook right off. They fall right off. And that's why it looks like kind of shredded meat. It's almost like a shredded kind of jerky or something. And you really, if you had them, you wouldn't know it's like you're saying, you wouldn't know you were eating a grasshopper. You would just say, this is a really interesting flavor. The big ones, They look like grasshoppers, you know. Right, right. Yeah. So that's important too. And they have these. They're coming from alfalfa going to the maize, and it really does change the taste. So yeah, it's important. So.
You mentioned that there were places on the west side where here in Columbus that you could
Yes.
try.
Yeah. So occasionally the Panaderia Oaxaqueño, which is off of West Broad, if you go under 270, there's like a small community, a small neighborhood of Oaxacans there, Oaxaqueños. And there's a little place off of, I don't remember the name of the street, but it's one of the streets that goes to the south. You know, there's like the old Eastland Mall, I think it's called. So, and there's a library there now, and there's a couple of kind of feeder streets that come up to Broad. And the Panaderia Oaxaqueña is on one of them. And they don't always have them, and it's not season yet, so they probably wouldn't have them yet. But you can occasionally get them. And yeah,
We'll just put it on the map. We'll just
yeah. So yeah.
That was phenomenal, Jeff.
So
Thank you so
well,
much.
thank you for inviting me.